To complete my series of Watchmen videos, I think it's time I take a look at Watchmen's sequel. No, not the HBO show, I haven't seen it, but instead the 12-issue limited series titled Doomsday Clock. Now, as I've mentioned, I already talked about the original comic series and the prequel series, their inceptions, some behind-the-scenes stuff, and their impact on the comic scene. But based on what I said about those two series, I think my opinions on this one might surprise you a little bit. You see, I came from the camp that criticized Before Watchmen due to the lack of involvement of its original creators and the feeling that they were just milking the series. But would you believe me if I said Doomsday Clock, yet another revival of the Watchmen brand that does a big multiversal crossover with the DC universe, is actually pretty good? In 2016, DC did yet another franchise-wide reboot titled Rebirth that eventually began stories such as The Button and the Oz Effect, teasing connections with Dr. Manhattan, inevitably leading to a collision course between the Watchmen universe and the DC universe that we would get in this story. Unlike Before Watchmen, this series was created by a single creative team. It was written by veteran DC writer Jeff Johns with some beautiful art by Gary Frank, a team that have worked together before, and it gives it a much greater sense of consistency than what you would find in Before Watchmen. On top of that, it seems like great care was put into how Watchmen would fit into the DC universe, pitting Dr. Manhattan and Superman against each other due to their mirrored stories, making sure this wasn't just riddled with a million tie-in issues that you would have to read to get the full picture, and ensuring that it wasn't just Watchmen 2, but a creative project in its own right. And while this very much is a sequel to Watchmen, reading this gave me the impression that it actually had something to say, unlike how Before Watchmen came across as something like, we have all these characters, let's do something with them. I couldn't find anything on what Alan Moore has to say about the story, but I'm sure he hates this as much as he hates everything else. There are things about this that I like and don't like. First, I'm not sure how to feel about them reviving dead characters from the original Watchmen comic. We get this all-new version of Rorschach, which, yes, I get it, he's a popular, probably the most popular character from the original Watchmen, and in this case, it's a new take on that character, but they literally revive the comedian, whose death was the start of the entire Watchmen story to begin with. I will say, though, since this is commentary on superhero comics like the original Watchmen story, you could look at this as acknowledging the way superhero comics always revive dead characters for better and worse. But all this is especially odd when Night Owl and the Silk Spectre, two of the main characters from Watchmen, who are still alive, are just not included in this story. Another issue I have with this is that some of the story just drags and takes a bit longer to move the plot along than I would like. And it's especially worse when this story, which is 12 issues long just like the original, took over 2 years to fully release. That's a really long time to tell this particular story, and I get why many were and probably still are mad about this comic. With that being said, I think there is more to like here than dislike. As I've mentioned, it's commentary on superhero comics like the original Watchmen story, but done in a different way. For example, a driving element of this story is how the DC universe is slowly turning on its heroes due to the Supermen theory, which proposes an explanation for 97% of metahumans coming from America, and that the US government is responsible for the creation of heroes and villains after Superman, with Superman being the sole exception, the unifying hero of the world that no one really hates. Not only does this story acknowledge an interesting element of the DC universe, like why so many heroes are American, and how no one really questions that, but it gives the chance to provide commentary on superhero stories in the opposite way that Watchmen did. At the end of the day, the original Watchmen is a cynical story about superheroes in a time they were mostly lighthearted, while Doomsday Clock is ultimately a hopeful story about superheroes in a time they're mostly dark, centering on Superman. It also aims to explain the reasons for all the reboots of the DC universe in this meta-textual way, but for the sake of not spoiling everything, I won't really get into it too much. The point is, this story has something to say, and it feels like a good companion piece to the original Watchmen. Again, it seems like a multiverse crossover between Watchmen and one of the biggest superhero brands is a recipe for failure and just kind of goes against what the original Watchmen story was about, but I think this was actually the direction it needed to go in to do something far more interesting than a standard sequel could have been. It's also for DC fans who aren't exclusively Watchmen fans or maybe even haven't read Watchmen, it's a new way of looking at the DC universe, one of the biggest superhero franchises ever. It's a new way of looking at it that makes you think about the characters on a deeper level. To sum it all up, Doomsday Clock feels like a story much closer in spirit to the original Watchmen story than the mountains of content that Before Watchmen had to offer. It has a more focused vision, a singular creative team, and meta commentary in a new way that makes this a good companion piece to the original. Even though the original Watchmen, it's still better. It aims to give new reasons for DC's constant reboots and provide a hopeful ending for Watchmen as well as a glimpse of a more hopeful future for DC. So that's what I have to say about Doomsday Clock and just the Watchmen franchise as a whole. Maybe I'll talk about it more later, but that's all I have to say now. If you guys have thoughts on Doomsday Clock or the original Watchmen, let me know in the comments below. Doomsday Clock, it's a little bit controversial. Like Before Watchmen was, it's not as widely praised as the original Watchmen, so you might dislike this story. Personally, I liked it. But again, let me know what you think in the comments. Like this video so that I can make more videos. Subscribe, share it, do whatever you want. That's all I have to say. Take care.